situated on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin all throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. We express our deepest respect and gratitude to our Indigenous neighbors for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. And on behalf of the Center for Canadian American Studies here on campus, I'm really delighted to open up tonight's forum on hockey in Cascadia. Before I hand it over to tonight's moderator, I would first like, just through a show of hands, who here are students? Nice, very nice. Staff and faculty? And community members? All in that little area, very nice. Excellent, it's nice to see a good representation of all. This, tonight's event is also going to be recorded, and so you will probably, I think the Alumni Association will be mailing or emailing you a copy of tonight's recording that you're free to view and hand along to others. Welcome to tonight's online presence. We are here, we see you. Thank you so much for joining us. There will be a time for questions following tonight's forum in Q&A fashion, and we will have our moderator to help with those questions. And we will start, first of all, by looking always to questions from our in-person audience. So without further ado, I would like to welcome tonight's moderator, Dr. Derek Moscato. Derek Moscato is a professor of journalism and an affiliated professor in the Center for Canadian American Studies. I will let him give his own bio because he does it a lot better than I can. So without further ado, Dr. Derek Moscato.
All right, thank you so much, Christina, and welcome hockey fans and curious observers here in person and also our attendees on Zoom. Really looking forward to today's activities. Before we get going, I wanted to thank the Center for Canadian American Studies for making this unique event happen. I wanted to thank our distinguished guests for making their way to Bellingham from points near and far. And I wanted to thank the hockey, athletics, and journalism communities on campus and in Bellingham for helping to support this event. A special shout out to our own athletics historian, Paul Madison, for finding for me what I dub the Blue Folder, which is a small treasure trove of clippings and history about hockey's glory days on the Western campus. I wanted to thank the Seattle Kraken, the Seattle Times, and Bridgewater State University for loaning us their hockey experts. Today we're going to be looking at hockey in the Cascadia region as a sport on the move, but also as a grassroots vehicle for political and social shifts here in the Pacific Northwest, but also more broadly in the US-Canada borderlands. This transformation has been underscored by the recent arrival of the NHL Kraken to Seattle and their incredible success to date. But hockey has thrived in this region for many decades. It has a meaningful history right here in Bellingham. We have had thriving teams like the Western Vikings Club, the Bellingham Blazers, and leagues serving women's and amateur hockey, and much more. The late John Utendale, a professor of education here at Western, not only helped grow a thriving hockey scene here at Western and in the Bellingham community, he was also the first black hockey player to sign a professional contract with the National Hockey League. That's an extraordinary local legacy. I encourage you to read his story published last year by Paul Madison on the Western Athletics website. On that note, our three guests today are going to help us to understand the past, the present, and the future of hockey in Cascadia. So as we hear from them, I ask you to consider three overarching themes. Number one, the social impact of hockey, the way that it shapes our understanding of community, culture, and media. Secondly, I want to think about the economic impact with organizations like the Seattle Kraken, the Vancouver Canucks, the Western Hockey League, the men and women's national teams in the US and Canada, and how they help to drive media rights, fan interest, and new urban infrastructure like the stunning Climate Pledge Arena. And thirdly, the sustained and growing cultural relationship between the United States and Canada that is mediated through the sport of hockey. With all of that said, I'd like to introduce our first guest. Originally from St. Catharines, Ontario, Dr. Andrew Holman is a professor of history and the director of the Canadian Studies program at Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts. He has authored numerous books about hockey, as well as U.S. and Canadian history, among other scholarly topics, and this includes the excellent and highly recommended Hockey, A Global History. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Can you see me? Okay, great. This is a tall podium, actually. I should have a step stool or something here to help me out. I want to start by saying thanks to Christina. Where are you? Aha, right in the front, for inviting me. It's been a wonderful visit so far, and I'm thrilled to be here. So, and to see the Canadian American program and its flourishing state. And thanks to Derek as well for inviting me to come and speak to his class this morning. That was a real treat as well. I think I learned as much as anyone did being here. Now, our panel today, I don't think, wouldn't be happening unless one momentous undertaking hadn't occurred, and that's the establishment of a National Hockey League team in Seattle starting the 2021-22 season. The pride of the Pacific Northwest, and a team that has been, I think it's fair to say, a surprise success. Is that?
It definitely, yeah. Making the playoffs in their second year would count as a success.
And we're close.
They're going to make the playoffs.
They're going to make the playoffs. All right. They're in the hunt, certainly, and it looks like they're going to be successful getting that wild card spot. Now, this is remarkable what they've done on the ice. But perhaps even more important is the Kraken's way of doing things. And Andrew's going to tell us, I'm sure, more about this today, which I think is a breath of fresh air. Its business model is new and different. Its commitment to diversity and inclusion is new and different. And its avowed concern for environmental matters, new and different. And the sport, I know this from having studied its history, that is known for its stubborn ties to hidebound tradition. I think the Kraken is looking good. And so now that I've said that, watch, they'll disappoint us in some way or not. But for now, things I think are looking positive. I mention this because not this past January, but a year ago January, I was at an event in Boston called the Carnegie Initiative. And this is an initiative that's put forward by Bernice Carnegie, who is the daughter of Herbie Carnegie, the best black hockey player who never played in the NHL. Wasn't given the opportunity in the 1940s and 50s to do so. And wrote a wonderful autobiography. There's been quite a lot said about him since. And so it was a gathering in Boston with leaders, hockey leaders from across North America. The NHL was there. NHL teams were invited to come and to send representatives and to hear people speak about the importance of diversity. And the Seattle Kraken had, by my count, 4 or 5 representatives compared to the other NHL teams, which had, some had none, but the most that any other team had was 1 representative. And to me, it was a small thing, but it was a symbol of just how different the Kraken promised to be. So we look forward to even better things. Well, how did we get here? Derek's tasked me with the job of explaining some elements of the region's hockey heritage, but especially its presence as a cross-border phenomenon. And so I'm going to try to touch a little bit on that without boring you to tears. This happens to me at cocktail parties, right, where I'll bump into, oh, what do you do? And, well, I'm a teacher. What do you teach? History. Oh. And I have to meet a new friend, right? Well, at Bridgewater State, I teach Canadian and United States history and sport history. And one of the things I write about is the border. It's changing meanings over time as a barrier and as a threshold and as a connector between nations. And so for me, as somebody who grew up in the borderlands, to understand hockey in places like Niagara or in the Detroit River borderlands or in Sault Ste. Marie or in the prairies and plains, and as I've written, in the Pacific Northwest, Cascadia, as we sometimes refer to it, is to understand the way in which the border works, how a borderland works, how sometimes it's open, and how ordinary people use it routinely as a kind of hands across the border sharing of resources. I'll come back to that, I think, a little bit later. But first, a little bit about hockey history. So what I want to give you is the cocktail napkin version of its origins, how it was born. This is the part where you can roll your eyes and say, oh God. But maybe not. Okay, so hockey as we know it wasn't really born. Instead, it evolved from a series of ball and stick games that had been played in the North American continent by indigenous peoples and by European settlers. But it took its first modern form in Montreal in March of 1875, when a guy named James Creighton and a group of former McGill students rented the Victoria Ice Arena and equipped themselves in rugby pads, and they used lacrosse goals, which at that time were 2 sticks with flags on the top, ice skates, largely field hockey rules, and faced off against one another. We know about it because it was recorded in the Montreal Gazette, the same newspaper that published the first formal rules for ice hockey in 1877. And the game wasn't one that we'd recognize easily today. It had 9 players per side and no forward passing. Okay? Just like rugby, in order to go forward, you had to pass backwards or sideways in order to move the puck ahead. Oh, one part we might recognize. The very first game allegedly ended with a fight. From that date on, hockey grew, first slowly within central Canada, the Amateur Hockey Association of Canada, born in 1886, and then by the mid-1890s, not coincidentally, after the awarding of the Stanley Cup in 1893, rapidly all across Canada and into the United States. It reached Winnipeg in 1888, for example, and Toronto in 1890, Red Deer, Alberta in 1893, Pittsburgh and New York in 1896, Boston in 1897. I won't go on any further, but if you look at the book that Derek referred to, you'll see the grocery list. What I want to say is that it didn't just pop up organically. It was brought to those particular places because they were connected by railroad and because specific individuals brought the game there. Okay? Got sticks, got pucks, and convinced others. So we know it came to Winnipeg because a guy named P.A. MacDonald brought it there and convinced Winnipeggers to do so. And we know it came to Toronto because a guy named Tom Payton brought it there and convinced his buddies at the Granite Club to play the game. Hockey's first big splash in the Pacific Northwest came via the vision of 2 former Montrealers, the brothers Frank and Lester Patrick, who in 1911 established a big league hockey franchise in the West, the openly professional Pacific Coast Hockey Association. This was a rival that was established to the National Hockey Association, which had started the year before. Of course, the National Hockey Association goes on to become, in 1917, the National Hockey League. The Patricks built artificial ice rinks in Victoria and Vancouver, and they began to outbid NHA teams for elite players. And then they expanded across the border to Portland, where the Rosebuds played starting in 1914, to Seattle, where the Metropolitans played starting in 1915, to Spokane in 1916. Portland was the first team to challenge for the Stanley Cup in 1916. But Seattle was the first U.S.-based team to win it in 1917. Now, big league hockey in the Pacific Northwest disappeared when the PCHA emerged with the Western Canada Hockey League in 1924. I should say that Geoff here has written a brilliant brief historical account about big league and minor pro hockey in Seattle leading up to the establishment of the Kraken, and I recommend it highly. You can see it online, Hockey News, October 2021, is that right?
Probably 2021, yeah.
Okay, so just as they're coming in, have a look at it, it's really quite good. Now, in it, he shows that Seattle has a really mercurial patchwork history of elite hockey teams from the days of the Patrick Brothers, Pacific Coast Hockey Association. After the PCHA folded, there came almost 100 years of minor pro hockey and an ebb and flow of teams such as the Seattle Eskimos in the late 1920s, the Seattle Seahawks in the 1930s. You thought they were just a football team? Seattle Totems in the 1950s and 60s, and of course teams, if we look a bit further east, like the Spokane Jets and later Flyers in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. The Spokane Jets, who had the temerity to win the Allen Cup 4 times. The Allen Cup is supposed to be the pinnacle of Canadian senior hockey. Those darn Jets took it. Okay. So Geoff also traces some of the more colorful personalities who moved here, applied their skills in front of Pacific Northwest audiences. Guile Fielder, Fred Shiro, Emile the Cat Francis, Noel Picard, Pat Quinn, and others. Now, to this rich history of professional hockey, we add a history of major junior hockey, starting in 1976 with the Portland Winterhawks, in 77 with the Seattle Breakers, who become known as the Thunderbirds, the Billings Bighorns, who later become the Tri-City Americans, Spokane Chiefs in the early 1980s, and of course the Everett Silvertips in 2003. If we follow one important narrative, the one that I've just given you a kind of thumbnail sketch about, if we follow the elites, the professionals, and the semi-professionals, we get a story then of big league Canadians who transplanted their game here. Okay, but what I want to suggest is that there's a second narrative that's worth knowing about. A competing narrative, or maybe a parallel narrative, that says that almost from its earliest days, hockey in the Pacific Northwest often functioned as a shared experience, a hands across the border connector that was played and enjoyed by ordinary Canadians and American neighbors on both sides of the line. Okay, so if we look away from elite hockey, if we look away from the big time, the bright lights, we can see something a little bit different. Below the big leagues, beyond the stars, hockey in the Canada-US borderland was a shared resource. Admittedly asymmetrical, lots more Canadians were invested in the game than American borderlanders were. But that doesn't diminish the point. Hockey was a staple part of cross-border culture. We can see it in the 1890s, well before the Patricks created big league hockey in the big city metropolitan Northwest. In those years, in the 1890s and early 1900s, hockey was played in the mining, smelting, timber, and railroad towns. In the Kootenay region, Caslow, Sandon, and in Nelson, and Greenwood, and Rossland, and Trail, Grand Forks. It was played also across the border, too. There was a Spokane High School Hockey Club as early as 1897. And in 1905, a Spokane Hockey Club sent a team to the Rossland, BC Winter Carnival Tournament. And they even established a 5-team city league by 1911. If you go a little bit further east, still in Cascadia, but maybe just, hockey clubs sprouted up in Butte, in Missoula, 1909, in Helena, from Massachusetts. In Coeur d'Alene, 1911. Here's a piece, a short quote from the Anaconda Standard, proclaimed in January 1910. Hockey is growing in popular favor, it claimed. And then in the same year, 1 month later, the Nelson Weekly News reported a game in Moy, British Columbia, where players divided themselves into 2 sides for the local recreational highlight of the winter. And I quote, John Bull and Uncle Sam meet in a friendly contest in a most interesting hockey match played in the rink here on Friday evening last between teams representing John Bull and Uncle Sam. Okay, so John Bull, of course, Canada was still a British dominion at that stage. The latter team was victorious by a score of 6-4. A large number of spectators were in attendance, and the game was one of the most amusing ever played here. This fact being attributed to the costumes of the different players and their antics. During the game, both goaltenders were put on the fence. Anybody know what that means? If you got a penalty back in the day, you didn't go to the penalty box. You had to go sit on the boards for 2 minutes, and then you were brought back in. So in this game, the goaltenders were put on the fence. Okay, Let me just give you a little bit more detail here, and then I'll stop. But this cross-border hockey culture is evident to us not just in the games that were played in the Kootenay region, but also the Gonzaga College Bulldogs team that played in the 1930s against Canadian men's senior teams in the Border City League. And during the Second World War, almost as a way of reinforcing the formal military alliance that existed between Canada and the U.S., war industry workers in Seattle and Vancouver played against one another in a series of challenge matches that the press called Hands Across the Border series. There were reports in the 1960s of customs officials at the Canada-U.S. crossing north of Colville making friendly wagers whenever the Spokane Jets crossed the border to play against the formidable Trail Smoke Eaters. And one last example, in the 1990s and 2000s, when Seattle's gay and lesbian communities organized an annual Slide for Pride winter athletics carnival that featured female and male ice hockey tournaments that included Team Seattle and their rivals, the Vancouver Cutting Edge. Both teams organized by and for gay men. And there was the Seattle Icebreakers as well, as part of that, a co-ed team that played in that same tournament. And the list goes on. But I think the point is made. If we insist on looking at hockey in the Northwest as being imposed from above, from the North, Canada's game borrowed by the U.S., then I think we miss the full spectacle of things. It was also at the same time very much a cross-border culture. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. We do have a lot of snacks left, so please help yourself to some food and beverage. I want to introduce our next speaker, Montreal native Geoff Baker. Geoff is a Seattle Times writer and columnist covering the NHL and the Kraken. Previously, Geoff wrote a sports business column and did investigative sports reporting after 16 seasons covering Major League Baseball for the Seattle Times and the Toronto Star. He is a 3-time winner of the Associated Press Sports Editors Award, and his new book, Rising from the Deep, is a sports, business, and political thriller about the birth of the Kraken, the demise of the Seattle Supersonics, and the years-long quest for a new major sports arena in Seattle. It sounds fascinating. Over to you, Geoff.
All right. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here, and thank you for everybody who came, and for those of you who are listening in on Zoom. I hope you'll find this interesting. While I was researching some of the book, and I call it researching some of the book that I just had published, it wasn't really planned to be research for a book at the time. It's just basically the life that I lived the prior decade, waiting for them to upgrade or build a new sports arena in Seattle. And so I got a chance to meet a lot of people that are now involved with hockey here in Seattle at the time. But at the time, we didn't really know there was going to be an NHL team here. A lot of people assumed it was going to be the NBA that would be coming to Washington first, coming back to Washington. But about 9 years ago, almost around this time, it was probably about March, I had an opportunity to travel up to Vancouver with a contingent of local politicians and local business people. And some political people that I knew suggested that I come along. And the purpose of the trip was to tour some of the sports infrastructure in Vancouver, speak to some of the sports people that were there, and just give the business leaders, some of the business people in Seattle, a sense of what was coming and what could be coming, what could be a possibility. Now, I got on that bus, and I was literally the only person on the bus who knew anything about hockey or the NHL, because I grew up in Montreal. So everybody was turning to me and asking me questions about it, and they were really fine-tuned on the NBA at the time. Hockey was sort of a secondary thing. This was back in 2014. Seahawks had just won the Super Bowl a couple of weeks before. So it's all pretty fresh in my mind. So we get up to Vancouver. One of the first people that we got to meet up there in a closed-door session was a guy named Victor DeBonis, who's now the president of the Seattle Kraken, and he also happens to be my neighbor a few streets away in Magnolia in Seattle. But At the time, Victor was the chief operating officer of the Vancouver Canucks. And so he came into this room full of about about 24 of us, I would say. I don't know if he knew that I was going to be writing something in my column, so he was speaking kind of candidly and off the cuff, but it was fascinating to listen to Victor because it was pretty eye-opening. He was speaking a lot about the potential for a Seattle-Vancouver rivalry, and not just an on-ice rivalry, but just enhancing the sport of hockey throughout the region. He spoke very energetically, very enthusiastically about how the Vancouver Canucks so badly wanted to have an NHL team in Seattle. He said the Canucks really missed, they used to have a pretty strong rivalry with the two Alberta teams, Edmonton and Calgary. But back then, about a decade or so ago, both have kind of fallen off the pace. Vancouver was kind of slipping a bit at that time. And, they didn't really have what they once had. And he said, just think of the commonalities we have between the two regions. Forget about the border, forget about Canada, the U.S. He said, we literally have thousands of people here in Vancouver who are Seattle Seahawks season ticket holders. And they cross the border and go down every single Sunday to see the Seahawks play. And he said, look at what happens when the Toronto Blue Jays go down to play the Seattle Mariners. And I've covered both those teams for many, many years. The Blue Jays in Toronto and the Mariners here in Seattle for many years. And I can tell you, it got pretty ugly when the Blue Jay fans would go down from BC to watch the Mariners games. They weren't that rowdy when I was in Toronto. They were the quietest fans in baseball, but the ones from BC tend to be a lot more rowdier than the ones from Toronto. And so he was talking about that, very enthusiastic, but he spelled out, just think, even though we're on the Canadian side of the border, and you folks are from the Seattle, the Washington side of the border, the U.S. side of the border, he goes, our two regions, our two cities, our Pacific Northwest region has so many shared commonalities, so many shared values, and at times it's almost there's almost more of a symbiotic relationship between our two cities than there would be between Vancouver and, let's say, the rest of Canada. As I just mentioned, Toronto Blue Jay fans, very different in Toronto than they are in Vancouver. But anyway, it's a shared, he spoke a lot about the shared relationships between the two and how there were just so many business opportunities they could see, and so much opportunity for a rivalry, a healthy rivalry that could really further the business interests of both the Canucks and well, he didn't know it was going to be called the Kraken at the time, and a Seattle NHL team, if that ever came to be. And so that was back in 2014, and I have to say, and I've told Victor this before, I mean, when I heard him speak that day, I knew, not for certain, but I was a lot more certain that we were going to have NHL hockey in Seattle a lot quicker than people ever anticipated. And the reason is because he was the chief operating officer. He's not going to be sitting there speaking to a group of people in a back room this enthusiastically without the go-ahead from his owner to do that. And he assured us that the owner of the Canucks was very, very interested in having a Seattle team and would vote for any Seattle team that would ever be proposed in front of the Board of Governors for the NHL. And so I heard all that, and I was like, that's what I took away from that trip. It was about a two or 3 day trip that we were on. They call it a junket in politics, but for me, I actually have to work, so I had to write a column about it. And I said, I'm going to make this topic of my sports business column. And I wrote about, some of what DeBonis was saying. And, think about it, though. This is back in 2014. Nobody really thought hockey was going to be coming to Seattle. But behind the scenes, there was all this preparation being made because people wanted it to happen. People could see the advantage of a regional rivalry. And so much so that DeBonis ended up leaving the Canucks a few years later, and he came and took over as chief operating officer of NHL Seattle, which was the precursor to the Seattle Kraken. And today he is, as of last year, as of about a year ago, he's now the president of the Seattle Kraken. He is very enthusiastic, I can guarantee you, as enthusiastic, if not more, today about the potential for the rivalry as he was back then. And to tie it all into present day, I mean, last night, I actually literally crossed the border about 2 hours ago. So last night I was at the Kraken game in Vancouver. And I can tell you, I started to see some of what he was envisioning back then, some of what other NHL leaders and other wheelers and dealers in the sports business world were envisioning back then in 2014 and even prior to that. We started to see some of that last night. For the first time, you really saw a lot of Kraken supporters in the stands in Vancouver who had obviously traveled up from Seattle. And this, you know, everything got delayed because of COVID-19 and the pandemic last year, especially coming this way across the border. A lot of Canadians either couldn't come or didn't want to come across the border. And it was likewise, the Canadian government made it very difficult for cross-border travel for a good part of last season. I know because I had to do it. And even as a citizen, it was difficult for me to do it. So this year, we're finally starting to see it. And this year, the Kraken are actually good enough to actually start to have a semblance of a rivalry between these two teams. For the first, I think it was 6 games, the Kraken couldn't beat the Canucks. So you can't have a rivalry if one team's beating the other all the time. That's not a rivalry. You have to at least beat them once. And now the Kraken have beaten them twice. And last night, I can tell you, the Kraken are going to the playoffs this year. Barring a complete disaster, they're going to the playoffs. They'll probably be in as of, they'll almost certainly be in as of tomorrow, but we'll see. We'll let it play out. But Canucks aren't going to the playoffs. So the Kraken actually have the edge this year. And so those fans were anxious. They were going up there last night to see a bit of a beatdown. And they ended up getting it, a bit of a slow start. They got it. And they were very demonstrative, very boisterous in the crowd. And you started to hear it. The Kraken fell behind 2-0 very early on. But they finally scored at the end of the first period. And you hear this loud noise. It's like, whoa, where's that coming from? Holy cow, there are a lot of Kraken fans in here. Second period happens. Kraken just keeps scoring, and the place gets louder and louder. And the final 10 minutes of the game, basically all the Canucks fans have gone home, or they're really upset at their team and just starting to boo them or starting to cheer when they do something bad, because the Canucks fans can get that way. But the Kraken fans were making a lot of noise. And I can tell you, there were a lot of Kraken staffers in the crowd. A lot of them made the trip up yesterday, ran into quite a few of them. And I can tell you, they're probably watching that thrilled, because this is what everybody's been envisioning between the two cities since hockey became an idea for the city of Seattle. I keep saying this city. I know we're not in Seattle, but we started to finally see that last night, and it was very interesting to me, and it makes me very happy. The reason I took this job, the reason I started covering the Kraken, isn't because I wanted to go back into beat writing. I did it for 16 years, covering baseball, and you know, there's more fun things you can do in life than beat writing. But if I wanted to go back to beat writing full time again, it was going to be doing hockey, because it's a sport I grew up around in Quebec, in the city of Montreal, in the city of Laval, actually. When I was a kid, I got to see Mario Lemieux, one of the greatest hockey players of all time, play his junior hockey in my hometown when I was 16 years old. And that was a lot of fun. So the opportunity to be here and to write about it and explain some of the history of the game and some of what makes hockey interesting to a newer market here was a great opportunity. And that's something I said, you know what, that would be worth going back to beat writing and doing the travel and doing all the pain in the neck practice stuff again, because you know, it's fun to have a comprehension and have a sort of a sense of what came before you. And I got to see it firsthand from the business side, which a lot of it's outlined in the book, but it's okay, you don't have to go buy a copy. I'll tell you the broad strokes here. It's just really, it represented a business opportunity. And the big opportunity, you know, one of the bigger goals of redoing Climate Pledge Arena was to get a basketball team back eventually. And, you know, right now we're waiting on the NBA, and they're going to announce an expansion process, I would say sometime in the next 2 years. And Seattle is going to be one of the teams that they bring back, and that's one reason they built the arena. Now, a lot of people think the hockey team was a secondary reason that they built the arena, because you have to fill an arena as much as you can, but it's more than just that. Had the Opie group wanted to, that's the group that did the arena, I mean, they could have filled it with music almost every single night when there was, you know, no basketball being played. Or right now, if they'd not gotten a hockey team, they still could have filled it with music on a lot of nights. They've cornered the market on music. They have great music partners. And so that's not it. I mean, they really do believe that hockey can flourish in this area. Tim Lywicki, who I've met several times, who's a big factor in the book that I wrote, he's got enormous experience in the NHL as well as the NBA, but he ran the Los Angeles Kings for years. He ran the Toronto Maple Leafs for years. You know, he knows the sport of hockey. He's on first name basis with Gary Bettman, just like he is with Adam Silver in the NBA. So he's not going to just do this on a whim and say, oh yeah, let's try hockey, see if it works in Seattle. No, they saw this was a vast market with untapped potential. It's one of the reasons Jerry Bruckheimer wanted to get involved in the ownership group, is because they had opportunities to go into other sports, him and some of his partners, and including David Bonderman, who's now the majority owner, along with his daughter, Samantha Holloway. They're both co-owners of the team, but Jerry Bruckheimer is also a longtime partner in this. Bruckheimer, of course, did the Top Gun Maverick movie this year. But one of the reasons they looked was because he thought hockey was undervalued as a commodity. And a lot of people have that opinion, you know, and I'll tell you, I collect sports cards. I collect hockey cards going back over 100 years. And I can tell you the price of some of those sports cards is a fraction of what you would pay for a similar baseball card in the sports card market. Not as much since the pandemic. A lot of people have figured it out that, hey, these are undervalued, and they're snatching them up, and so the price keeps going up and up. So if you own a lot, you're lucky. If you're still just breaking in now, you're a little less fortunate because it costs more. But that's what they wanted to get in on, was a hockey franchise while they still could, because it was still seen as an undervalued commodity. And so a lot of that played into why we have hockey now in this region, and a lot of that played into why the Vancouver Canucks were so supportive of having the Kraken come into play in the NHL, and why the NHL in general was so supportive of having a franchise here. I mean, not every sport wants to dilute its product and have to split the pie among 32 teams if you can split it among 30 teams. You know, and so when you expand, you got to make sure that the expansion is going to work, because you don't just want short-term money up front and then have to pay a price for the next 10 years keeping these franchises afloat. And so they thought it was going to be very successful. We started to see evidence of that last night, finally. It takes time, but we saw evidence of that cross-border rivalry. And it's the same thing. It's like rising tide floats all ships. You know, the feeling in both markets is that if you have a strong Northwest rivalry, hockey's going to thrive in this region. And again, our border, which I just crossed, took 5 minutes today. It was great. I've had lesser experiences. That border is not as significant as, let's say, the Rockies are in separating Alberta from British Columbia. You know, it's really, a lot of it's psychological more than anything. And there is a very common factor between the two places that I know the Kraken are counting on to become a force in this region. So I'm not going to stand here and talk all day, but I'm sure we'll answer questions later, and that's just my take on things for now.
All right, thank you very much, Geoff. And, you know, it's thematically very interesting in terms of the buildup of this new rivalry in Cascadia. And I really recommend Geoff's reporting in today's Seattle Times covering yesterday's game. It's really an interesting and critically important milestone for the health of the game in the region. So we've heard from the past of hockey. We've now heard from the present. Now we're going to hear something about the future of the game in Cascadia. Everyone that I talk to inside the Kraken organization raves about the work of our next speaker. Andrew Bloom is the Community Engagement and Youth Access Specialist for the Seattle Kraken and One Roof Foundation. Andrew's mission is to make true the aspirational statement that, quote, unquote, hockey is for everyone. Andrew works to identify and remove barriers for underrepresented communities to take part in hockey, whether through ice skating programs at the Kraken Community Iceplex or youth street hockey and floorball programs in neighborhoods around the state. He has a pretty important mission, so welcome, Andrew.
Brought some slides, so give me 2 seconds to get set up. While I get these going, thank you to Geoff and Andrew for being here and setting the stage for what I'm about to talk about. And thank you for the university, Derek, for having us. This is a great opportunity for us to come up and share a little bit about what we're doing and where we would like to see the sport headed. And we're really excited, and I think there's a lot of potential, as Geoff was just mentioning. and we're just barely tapping into it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about growing the game in the Pacific Northwest and what we're doing to create new fans. As Geoff was mentioning, it took a lot of effort for the team to get here. Victor is a very enthusiastic person, but that enthusiasm only goes so far. When you get the team, you get in Seattle, you have a lot of people who are already bought in, they love hockey, but what about the people who have never been exposed to hockey before? Seattle has a lot of that. And so for us to be a very sustainable team, we have to go out and we have to go tap into that market and make sure that they feel welcome and a part of the sport. So just start with our North Star. So, oops, is that?
Doesn't seem to want to catch up.
It does not.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that works.
Just won't go in present mode. So our North Star, our Todd Lewicki, who's still our CEO, has a saying, "Make us better." So that's kind of everything we do. It drives us, make us better, and so that's everything from us internally to our fans. Our fans make us better. That is kind of what we focus on. It was born out of a desire to do things differently, do things better, to be change makers in this industry. We see ourselves as not just community, but hockey. We want to make entertainment better. So it means removing barriers, uplifting our community, ensuring everyone is truly welcomed and seen. And so we really do strive to make sure everyone feels a part of the Kraken family, and we really do feel that hockey is for everyone. So just kind of real quick, diving into where the sport is at currently. So worldwide, the NHL is the 5th most popular sport in the league. Obviously, I think a lot of people in this room would probably disagree. I think everyone who follows hockey probably thinks it's their favorite sport, and I think we all would love to see it a little bit more popular. But it is definitely growing. So last season, the deal with ESPN and Disney, the NHL's viewership went up 18%. Hopefully that will continue. And the interest just continues to grow. In 2009 to 2021, the U.S. fan base the female fan base grew 30%. And in the 2023 Winter Classic, the average viewing went up 31%, and that's all continuing to trend upward. Obviously, we're very excited having the Winter Classic in Seattle to be able to tap into that and really take what we're doing and put it up on this broad pedestal and really show the world what we're doing. So looking ahead, how do we continue to expand kind of what we just talked about? How do we continue to expand it in the Pacific Northwest? And how do we do it making sure that everybody feels welcome? So it looks like a few different things. So first off, we want to build an established hockey market that includes everyone. Talk a little bit about that. Talking about growing on our on-ice participation and representation, our off-ice hockey ecosystem, and then expanding our community initiatives. So in 10 years, what might this look like? Will look like a winning hockey franchise known for breaking barriers. In 2 years, I think we can honestly say that we might already be doing that. Climate Pledge Arena and KCI are regarded as leaders in sustainability and accessibility. Again, some might say that already we're already leading the charge in a lot of those areas. An expansive and diverse fan base throughout the region. Kids of all backgrounds and life experiences loving the game of hockey. And the gold standard for driving measurable change within our community. So why do we want to focus so much on diversity? For one, 40% of the current fan base in hockey is women. and 25% is BIPOC. So that's like an untapped market. And it's something that we need to be able to engage with and make sure people are feeling welcome for them to be able to drive this business. In 2045, white people will be 50% of King County's population. And so it's like, in order for this business to stay sustainable, we need diverse populations to be able to participate in the sport, come to events, buy merchandise, buy tickets. And so that's really the business driver behind it all, but it's also like it's just the right thing to do. So what are the challenges that we're up against when we're talking about how do you get new fans into the sport who wouldn't otherwise turn on to hockey before the Kraken existed? So typically, most people, when you grow up, you get into a sport because you play it. You know somebody who played it, your family played it. That's one of the big things we're up against in Seattle. A lot of kids have not grown up playing that. They haven't had family members growing up playing. Hockey, I think somebody was saying earlier, hockey in the Pacific Northwest has existed for a long time, as Andrew just mentioned, but a lot of it has kind of flown under the radar. If you were involved in hockey, you knew exactly where to go to find hockey, but if you have no background in hockey, where would you go? So that's one of the big things we're up against. Cultural inaccessibility. Young people perceive hockey as a niche sport, and it's again something, if they're not involved in it, why should they? What is bringing them to the table? And so that's another thing we're trying to change and trying to push the boundary on. Role models is another one. When you look at representation in players, coaches, broadcasters, et cetera, young people want to be able to see themselves in those roles, to be able to see the potential in what they can do and to dream to fill those roles. Having Everett and JT as our broadcasters is a huge, huge benefit to us. And they know the pressure that is upon them, like having the players that we have, they are the representation for the community, and they definitely do not take that burden unknowingly. Another big one is the financial barrier. Hockey, as most of us know, is very expensive to play. Ice time is expensive, equipment is expensive. If you're on a travel team, it's all very expensive. So these are the big challenges we're up against, and so these are some of the things I'm going to be mentioning what we're addressing in a lot of our programming. And just a little bit of background on why do you typically see white men at the top of the highest levels? So there's a number of reasons for that. The first one is lack of infrastructure and cultural relevance, which I kind of just mentioned. In Seattle, there's not that many ice rinks. In general, there's before the Iceplex was built, there wasn't actually any in the city itself. You had to go out into the suburbs. Now the Kraken Iceplex is the only one, and with 3 rinks, it's still not big enough. We're running out of ice time, so it's always a giant game of Tetris trying to fit everybody onto the ice. Lack of training and resources. Ice and intern training is all difficult to access, like coming after school, driving. If you're in the south end of Seattle, driving all the way up to Northgate just for practice is a toll, and it's a burden on a lot of families. So it's not something that they're going to choose to do. Lack of exposure. Once you get into that, if you make it past those barriers, competitive players are under-recruited because of lack of development. And then overall, hockey's culture has historically been one where underrepresented youth have not felt welcome, and so they choose to opt out. All right, so I'm going to get a little bit more about what we're doing about it, what we're working on. So this picture actually is our Refugee Women's Alliance program. So this is one of the programs that we is it's kind of one of our crowning jewels, is we have a partnership with this organization called Refugee Women's Alliance. They are this incredible nonprofit. They do a lot of different things for refugees in the community, but one of them is they have a free and low-income based preschool. They have multiple locations around Seattle. And we've partnered with them for a 32-week-long Learn to Skate program where we have committed to every season, we will bring 60 of their kids to the Iceplex. We'll pay for transportation, pay for their skates, their ice time, and we want them to be ingrained in the hockey community from 3 years old until they leave the area. So that's one of our commitments, and it's I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But that's what that picture is from. So I just wanted to mention that. So the best thing about all of this is kids are interested. Kids want to play hockey. Kids want to try ice skating. And this is something we can tap into. So it's kind of hard to see, but these graphs are from the 2019 State of Play report. So the Aspen Institute did a landscape analysis in King County just before the pandemic and looked at sports in general across King County and looked at what kids were playing, demographics of kids, what they were playing, what they weren't playing, why they weren't playing them. And what they found is kids who had money, who had resources, were playing whatever they wanted. Kids that came from socially diverse backgrounds or from lower income households were opting out for a number of reasons. Cost of participation is a big one. Access to facilities is another big one. Transportation is a huge one in our area. So this graph was a survey of what did kids, if you could try any sport you wanted, what would you want to play? And 36% of BIPOC youth indicated that they would love to try hockey or learning how to ice skate, which is huge. So now how do you get them there? And how do you get them to continue to come back? And so that's a lot of what we've been doing and are going to continue to be doing. So 4 of our targeted efforts. So off-ice hockey is a huge one. As I mentioned, we don't have a lot of ice in Seattle. The Iceplex is only so big, and it's situated in the north end of the city. So how do you get everybody else who can't make it there, don't have a car, don't have the resources to get there, how do you get them to be able to feel that they are welcome into the sport? And so floorball, street hockey is the way to do that. It's the most cost-effective way to play the sport, and so we're investing big into that. So we are partnering with schools, school districts, nonprofits, community centers, and providing them with floor hockey sticks, equipment, goals, everything you would need to play, including curriculum and training for them to be able to provide it in their PE classes, after-school programs, and really give them everything they need to get their own programs up and off the ground. I'm one person. I can't go around the city running 50 different programs, so we really want to be able to kind of give everybody the tools they need to be able to grow their own programs organically, and they're starting to do that. We also know that having access to facilities to be able to play it is huge, so we're investing in multi-sport courts in different locations around the city. Our first one was actually just launched like 3 weeks ago now in Skyway, which is south of Seattle. It's in unincorporated King County. We partnered with King County to build a street hockey court where kids could come in, just play after school, and we launched an event where everybody who came took home a street hockey stick, and we have groups who are committed to coming there and running summer programming, and we have more courts on the way, so we're really excited about that. Our financial assistance program and field trip program, so this is how we're getting kids who want to be coming to the Iceplex to stay. So we have the Iceplex, we have all of these great Learn to Skate programs, youth hockey programs, but they all cost money. We are a for-profit business, and unfortunately, we can't just give away ice time for free. But we want to make sure that kids who want to be able to play, who can't afford to, have the opportunity. So we have a substantial financial assistance program where on a sliding scale, families can apply and receive up to 90% off their hockey, learn to skate, learn to play classes. And so it takes a $200 learn to skate class and makes it $20. So something that almost any family can afford. And we have over 400 kids currently in that program. 86% of those are BIPOC, 51% of those are female. We also have a program bringing those same schools that we're providing floor hockey sticks, the same nonprofits, giving them a chance to, hey, you got to play floor hockey in school, you got exposure to playing the game, now come see what it's like to skate on the ice. And so it's a really kind of twofold opportunity for them, and then once they get there, give them a chance to say, hey, if you really love this, we have these financial assistance programs, so like talk to your parents and you can sign up and come here every week if you want. So we're really making sure that those who want to be able to come, we are removing all of those barriers for them to be a part of it. Another big one is our HIFE program, which is Hockey is for Everyone. For those who may know, it's a NHL-sponsored marketing program, but we're really, taking it into our own and making it a big thing in Seattle. And so really what it is making sure that we are welcoming different cultures, different backgrounds, and making sure that they are seen and felt welcome in the sport. So we have many different nights. Some unfortunately fall outside of our season, so we have to celebrate those differently. But for example, we did our Lunar New Year game. So we had an artist who was from that community design this beautiful jersey based off the Year of the Rabbit. We brought in different groups from Asian communities and got them free tickets to the game. We had all sorts of different activations around the actual game itself. And so that's just one example. So we do that all throughout the season for every different kind of theme month that happens throughout the year. And then our Refugee Women's Alliance program, kind of mentioned already. All of those kids, once they finish the program, get kind of graduated into the financial assistance program so they can continue on their hockey journey. And so, yeah, that's a lot of it. I will say, I think a big part of it is the ownership group that Geoff was mentioning. The majority owners and the minority owners are really bought into this, and they really want to see this thrive, including we had the opportunity last week. We already had a field trip lined up for months from a charter school down in South Seattle. We do this monthly. We have groups coming in all the time, but we got in a call, or we had a conversation with Marshawn Lynch, who's one of the minority owners, with one of his agents, and we were mentioning that this was one of the reasons he really bought into it, and why he felt so passionately about becoming an owner. And he instantly was like, we need to talk. We need to get him here. And so we set up a meeting literally 3 weeks ago, and we're just mentioning all the things we could do. And one of the things came up, he's like, oh, I'm going to come to the Mariners game next week to throw out the first pitch. If there's anything going on, let me know. And so just happened to have this field trip lined up already. And without even any thought at all, he said yes. He's like, I'm coming. I'm surprising this field trip. It was the most amazing experience. So having that backing from the ownership group and people who really have that kind of sway in the community and can really engage kids, and for the kids of color to be able to see somebody like that, to be like, oh, if he is interested in hockey, if he's interested in skating, and he came to see me skate, that is how you make connections. That's how you make fans for life. And that is how, we hope to be a successful team 100 years down the road. So that is all I have for now. And I hope to answer any of your questions shortly.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. We all know about the Kraken's sort of commitment to environmental sustainability. It's embedded in the arena's name, after all. But what's really interesting, of course, is, and learning from you, is the Kraken's commitment to sort of a broader sustainability of hockey in the region. So it's going to be interesting to watch that play out in the coming years. We now have some time for some questions for our distinguished panelists. So if we have questions from our in-person attendees, I believe we also have some questions coming in from Zoom. Any questions about anything that we've heard about over the last while here. Yes?
I was gonna ask, what do you think has separated the Kraken from like other teams in the league? This is for like Andrew. What do you think has separated them from other teams in the league? Just by like holding themselves to a higher standard.
I'll have to ask you to repeat your question for the folks on Zoom.
What do you think has separated the Kraken from other organizations in the league, just holding themselves to a higher standard and reaching out to the community?
So I think one of the things is a lot of teams have existed for so long and they've been able to operate kind of the same way for so long as they kind of got stuck in their ways. And it's not that they don't want to be able to go out and do these things, is they don't necessarily feel the need to, because they've existed for so long, they have an established fan base, they, year after year, their season ticket holders are coming back, they have success. Whereas Seattle coming in as a brand new team in a brand new market where a lot of people don't understand hockey or feel that like hockey is going to be a sport that they're going to follow. I think that's really what sets us apart, is like we have decided like from the beginning, before we even were the Kraken, when we were still NHL to Seattle, is like this is what we are going to, we're setting the standard for ourselves because nobody else is, and kind of make other people come after us.
If I can answer that, and again, and I'll second some of what I think that they do try to be different, and they try to be different in a way, and I'm usually pretty cynical with this kind of stuff, but they've made some decisions that I've seen over the past few years where they actually took into account what was going on in the public at the time, rather than going after what was the most expedient or the most profit-oriented decision that they could have made. And I'll go back to, when the pandemic first began, they were on the verge of announcing their season ticket drive. They had spent lots of money on on building a season ticket headquarters where they were going to, across from the arena right now, where they were going to have this entire in-person showcase. You could come in and they had replica suites that they were going to show everybody, and the whole thing was going to be, you would come in individually, one-on-one, and you would do, they would show season ticket holders a laser light show and everything. And they had it all timed out. It was going to launch early in 2020. And right around that time is when the pandemic hit. And, they had to sideline it immediately. They made the decision to postpone it indefinitely. And it was not only that, there was other times, they were going to announce the team's name at some point in the middle of that year too, in 2020, and then the George Floyd killing happened in Minneapolis. And I know this at the time because I was talking with Todd Lewicki, the Kraken CEO, when they were, toying with the idea of bringing this name announcement out, because this was a huge deal. And you were getting close to the team's launch. It was already inside of, getting close to a year away from launch. You have to have a name, you have to have a logo, you have to have, and the Kraken were really worried about appearing insensitive to members of the black community, not only in Seattle, but nationwide, because here they were talking this big talk about how they're going to be all about diversity and inclusion, and they were thinking, like, how can we come out with these corporate announcements right in the middle of what the country's going through right now, and there were protests going on nationwide. Plus, a lot of our employees are members of the BIPOC community, and they feel very strongly about what's going on, as do a lot of their white employees. And so they were very concerned with how it looked all internally within the organization and also throughout the community if they went ahead with these corporate-related announcements, including the Amazon announcement about Climate Pledge Arena, the buying of the naming right. There was all these things, and they put a lot of that stuff on hold for quite a while before they finally came out with it. So that impressed me quite a bit. And I don't want to hijack this whole discussion, but they've kind of, that's one really big thing where they showed right off the bat, hey, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. You saw it during the pandemic as well. A lot of the restrictions inside Climate Pledge were very, very tight. And it's not just because the state mandated and the county mandated some of it. They were very tight with the pandemic restrictions, whereas other places throughout the country, people could walk into arenas and, maybe they'll get COVID, maybe they wouldn't. But that was one thing the organization was very reluctant to participate in. They wanted to do what was for the greater public good, which I was impressed with.
Just to throw one more thing on top of that, I think one of the other things we do really well that a lot of sports teams in general don't do is building relationships with these community members and showing up time and time again. It's one thing to say like, hey, here's some sticks, have fun, good luck, and then like never reach out to them again. That is something we don't want to be doing. We want to be showing up and then showing up again and making sure that communities feel that they're valued and that they are a part of the Kraken family. When we launched the Skyway Court just a couple weeks ago, we decided to write it into the contract that like we will activate it multiple times throughout the year. And so that's just one example of like how like we are kind of setting our own bar to get out and make sure that we are doing what is right and what we should be doing.
I think we had another question. Yep.
So Derek mentioned multiple areas in and around Seattle that had interest in hockey throughout the years. So I was just wondering what Kraken is doing outside of directly Seattle to get those fans in supporting and also playing hockey at a younger age. Cities like Bellingham, Tacoma, even as far as Spokane, because I know a lot of sports fans, range pretty far.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's tough. So we're trying to do as much as we can in the city, but also in the region as a whole. Like our market is Idaho to Oregon, all the way to Alaska. And with the time we've had, we haven't had a chance to do everything that we would want. But we have had a chance to send like our youth hockey coaches out on the road to, I can't remember exactly all the locations they came, but I know they came to Bellingham, Yakima, Spokane, and did a Try Hockey for Free event and promoting that. I know that's in the plans to do again. I know when we have the Winter Classic in a few months from now, at the beginning of 2024, there's going to be a lot of like statewide activations trying to get kids to come and skate who've probably never had the chance to skate in their areas, and then hopefully have a chance to be able to come to the game. So there's a lot of things that are going to be happening down the road that you should be able to look out for.
Great. We've got a few questions rolling in from Zoom, so I'll read the first one here. The question is, how does youth hockey play a role in this theme of cross-border relations? I don't know if anyone wants to pick that one.
I'll take a shot. I think the most obvious way would be in some of the travel that these youth teams do. I mean, you have a lot of exchange programs and a lot of cross-border leagues that extend beyond major junior hockey, where teams do cross borders, especially at younger travel ages. I know especially the girls programs here in Washington, I believe some of them have had to go up traditionally to British Columbia to play a lot of the top level competition, just because there wasn't enough of it here in Washington. And so I know that as that continues to build, as hockey continues to grow here, I think we are going to see more cross-border travel, simply because, as we've already heard from earlier today, that there's just not enough space here in the Seattle area. And so the demand for hockey has exploded so much since the Kraken came on board that I think teams are going to have to go elsewhere to find the best competition. And frankly, the best competition is still in Canada. A little biased in that, but I mean, it's the quickest drive from here, and so you're not going to drive to Detroit. And so I think it's inevitable that that'll continue to play a role.
Well, I think the opening of the Iceplex and having the Iceplex now as a kind of the epicenter of youth hockey in the Northwest region, at least on the USA side, is a huge asset. So now we have the ability to host these multi-day, weekend-long tournaments, and we can bring in teams from Vancouver and from other Canadian or BC towns and So then it's not us always going to BC to play some of the bigger tournaments. So that's exciting to have.
Plus, they're getting AAA hockey.
Yeah,
now, right?
AAA
That's the
hockey
highest
is-
level you can play.
Starting this fall. It's very exciting.
And so the hope is that Washington kids won't have to leave the state once they turn 14 years old to go play somewhere else like TJ Oshie had to do when he left Stanwood. He used to play hockey up in Everett, and he had to go move to Minnesota to learn how to play, and then he made the NHL, of course. So he's still with the Washington Capitals.
And a nice Skagit Valley connection there for us
Exactly.
here in Whatcom County. Very good. A related question coming in from Zoom with regards to youth hockey. How do we make hockey more accessible to those who cannot afford the price of the sports gear, the travel, etc.?
Yeah, that one is tricky. We're still trying to figure that out. It's it's a beast because every other sport you can go play in your high school gym or the YMCA gym or to a field and just and sign up. Whereas hockey, you need ice. At least if you're going to play ice hockey, you need ice. So having some sort of transportation component to that is huge. Equipment is one thing. We're starting to build out some equipment rental or equipment loaner programs. So for, to go in with the financial assistance program. But yeah, having a transportation component to that is huge, and it's something we're trying to play with a little bit. Having the Iceplex on the light rail line in Seattle is a huge benefit to that. So it really does kind of connect the whole city, and it's not the perfect solution because it's still, if you're in South Seattle, it's still an hour-long train ride for somebody or family of however many to take, so we're exploring some other options of after-school activity bus to come to the Iceplex, and more programs like our Rewall program where we're paying for the transportation to bring the kids to the ice and let them kind of take it from there.
There's some other ways in which I think it doesn't just fall on the shoulders of NHL teams, but equipment manufacturers, for example. Bauer has a program that's good for allowing kids who want to try out a game to have loaner equipment, for example. I think also, it's a question of registration fees often too, right? There's equipment, but it's also sometimes thousands of dollars for kids to register to play in a season's worth of games and practices, and so that's maybe a focus that people should look at as well. How can we bring the price of ice time down? It seems never to come down. It seems like, as somebody who plays with a bunch of old guys, I guess is what I would say.
I will say too, though.
I know a little bit about ice rink costs, and they just it never seems to level off. It's always headed up.
I will say too, really fast, the league has a lot of interest in this as well. And their NHL Learn to Play program includes a set of all your equipment. So you sign up for the Learn to Play, you go to your local hockey shop that's supported by this program, and you get fully kitted out with everything you need to be able to play. So it's all included in the registration costs. If you're paying full price, it's a little trickier, but if you have a financial assistance, it makes it much more manageable.
I should say USA Hockey and Hockey Canada both have programs for this as well.
Yep, it's huge across the board.
We've got another question that just now came in through Zoom that I'll read here. And it touches something on something that, Andy, you spoke in class earlier today. The LGBT community and hockey have been a lot in the news lately, nationwide and just across the border with the Canucks Pride Night. What is the feel now and in the future for the Seattle franchise and the PNW region in general regarding the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, that is a big one for us. We had our Pride Night back in March, and luckily, we've been seeing this across the league where certain teams have chosen to opt out, which is an interesting development. Luckily, we have a team that is fully supportive of LGBT and chose to go all in. I know there's future discussions at the league level of like what are these theme nights going to look like in the future. But I actually just heard from Victor today that no matter, whatever they decide, we will still have a little bit of control in our market, and it's something that we will always continue to push forward and celebrate and make sure that it is something that, we feel strongly that it is part of the hockey community and should be part of the hockey community. And you'll also see this summer our Zamboni in the middle of the Seattle Pride Parade. So that's another example of how we're going to be out and about.
I think it's important that, and maybe Geoff can speak to this as well, but that the media focus on the positive aspects of Pride Nights. There seems to be maybe a bit too much emphasis, in my estimation anyway, on the small handful of players who've decided to opt out, and that becomes the headline rather than the actual movement itself for celebrating Pride. And so I'm not sure if that's something that you've seen, Geoff, as well, but it strikes me that, we're paying an inordinate amount of attention to the exceptions rather than the rule in this movement.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We're paying a lot of attention to the exceptions to the rule. I think part of the issue, and I wrote about this 2 weeks ago in a column about a goaltender for the San Jose Sharks who was refusing to wear a Pride uniform because of his Christian beliefs. And that's his words, not mine. And so I think it is unfortunate when that happens. I think part of the issue is, though, that if you want to send a message to the LGBTQ community, that you support them and that you and that you are being inclusive of them in your sport, it kind of undermines that whole premise when you have individual players saying, well, yeah, but I can't show you that kind of respect because it goes contrary to my beliefs. And when you give a message like that, it's hard to speak out of both sides of your mouth and say that you're being inclusive on one side, but no, you're not going to recognize them as human beings on the other side of your mouth, which is effectively what they're doing. I've spoken to a lot of people with very strong Christian beliefs about this, and their beliefs are very contrary to what this goaltender was expressing. And I think part of the media's job is to highlight some of these inconsistencies that we're seeing from some of these players, and that if people don't do that and people don't speak out about it, it's just going to become commonplace, and then it makes it easy for guys like Gary Bettman, the NHL commissioner, to say things like, oh, we're really inclusive, but we are going to revisit this in the summer and see what we have to do to maybe smooth out the message a little bit. I mean, I think it just undermines it. I think it's the media's job to kind of show these contradictions in the light that they're in. And yeah, I mean, and that's what my column was about, basically. I mean, you can't say on one side of your mouth that you respect these people, but on the other side of the mouth, you don't respect them enough to actually put on a shirt and say that, yeah, you matter as a human being. And that's the whole point. I mean, nobody's telling these people they have to convert to another religion. Nobody's telling them, oh, if you're going to wear this shirt, that means you have to commit, you have to go and behave like a homosexual and have relations with men. No, nobody's telling you this. They're saying you're just putting on a shirt saying that you think they have a right to exist as a human being, and our sport includes you as a human being. And so for me, it's a very cut and dried issue. I know for a lot of people, they say that it isn't. I think you either respect people or you don't. Nobody's forcing you to convert religions. Nobody's forcing you to do anything illegal or anything unethical according to your religion. So, I think it's the media's job to call that out.
Great. We've got time for one more question. We've got a history question coming in from Zoom. And I'll be curious to see who can answer this. It's a pretty significant history question. Have the Kraken put the 1917 Seattle Metropolitan Stanley Cup pennant in the arena?
The original one?
Or some semblance of it.
Yeah, no, they've put a commemorative one inside the arena. They put that up on opening night.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
It's hanging right next to our 32. We retired the number 32. You're fine.
She'll let you go answer that.
I think you were there opening night as well, so you can speak to it. But yeah, it's definitely commemorated, and we hope to be able to do fun nods to the Metropolitans in the future.
there was actually a lot of debate within the organization about what to do with that, because they wanted this team to be separate and distinct. But on the other hand, it's tough to ignore, the fact that this city won the first Stanley Cup south of the border that's ever been won. The tricky part is that the Metropolitans weren't part of the NHL, so it's technically not, the same league. It's technically a little bit different, and the Stanley Cup was awarded a lot differently back then. I think they did the right thing, putting it up there. You have the Ottawa Senators in Ottawa who have a whole bunch of Stanley Cup banners up there from that era, from a completely different franchise that has nothing to do with the Ottawa Senators of today. And there's a little bit of cynicism around that. They have more cup banners up in that arena than in Ottawa than almost any other National Hockey League team. And yet that franchise that exists today never won any of them. It's an old franchise that went out of business for like half a century, and then they revived them in 1993, and under completely new people that have no connection, but yet they hang their banners up there. So there was a little, they didn't want to do that and make a whole spectacle of it, but I think one banner commemorating the city of Seattle is fine.
Great. We're going to leave it there. I think you've all given us, some great hope for the future of the sport in the Cascadia region. It's exciting to hear about the future developments and sort of everything that's gone on in the last couple of years in particular. I hope that you'll all consider continuing to follow, Andrew and Jeff's works, their books, their projects, their outreach in the community. And I wanted to thank all of you for joining us in person, and also all of those in Zoom land. Hopefully we'll do something like this again in the future, but in the meantime, let's give a big hand of applause for our three distinguished panelists.
Feel free to hang around, chat,
And there are snacks, and yes, feel free to hang around, absolutely.
we just don't have doggy bags, so. Thank you.